So hey everyone, welcome to the webinar. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Tracy Hazard. Welcome to How to Start a Successful Podcast with Authority and Influence. I think I added that since we sent this message out to you. But we're adding authority and influence because we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But the key is to start a successful podcast. And a lot of you have gotten advice, read books, watched videos. And we're going to talk a little bit about old school versus new school because there's a lot of really bad information out there. And how do I know this? I am the co-host of 4 podcasts, Feed Your Brand, Product Launch Hazards, WTFFF, 3D Printing, and the New Trust Economy. So I'm also the co-founder of Monetize.com, and we have over 210 or 220, I don't even know how many we have right now, podcasters on our network. And so we know what's working and what's not working, and what works when you launch today, not what worked 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. So we're really checking that out. So this is how to start a successful podcast today and build it with authority and influence. I'm also an Inc. columnist and an Authority magazine columnist, so I write about podcasters all the time. And I'm constantly interviewing them and getting them tips and tricks and all kinds of tactics that they've used to launch. And some of them have launched recently within the last year. So we're going to be incorporating a lot of those things in the information that we're bringing you as well. So how about we get started? So how to start a successful podcast with authority and influence. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And, you know, if you're thinking about it, it's probably because you have had a lot of different marketing problems. You've had all sorts of things weighing on you, things that you have to consider. Should I start a podcast? Do I need to have a better Instagram channel? Should I be YouTubing? Should I be on Vimeo? Should I do more email marketing? What's an editorial calendar? Like, all of these things are going through your brain. And honestly, it's stressing you out. And plus, the statistics are not in your favor. It's really hard to be seen. 800 million YouTube channels, 40 million Facebook pages, 32 million Twitter users, 800 million Instagram users, and you can imagine the content amounts with all of that. They're topping in the billions. Social conversion is only about 1.3%. And what I mean by conversion is that somebody clicking on your video, on your post, and doing something, taking your call to action in some way, shape, or form. It's only 1.3%. And that's across all social channels. It's super low. Why is it low? And why is Google conversion at 10xing that and it's at 13%? It's because social conversion is push. You're in their face and you aren't necessarily what they're there for. They're there to see cute cat videos and see how adorable someone's daughters are or the ugly baby that just was born, like whatever it might be. That's what they're there for. They're not there to receive your messages. And so when you send them out, mostly they're not relevant or they're not interested at that moment, so the conversion is low. Google conversion is higher on the other hand because at that point they're searching for something. Well, that's the same case with so much other marketing. We're going to talk about the podcast statistics in a moment. But first, let's talk about your DIY marketing goals. So many of you are doing it yourself, right? You are your solopreneur. You are an entrepreneur who's doing it all. That represents about 66% of all of the entrepreneurs in the market. 3.6 million of you out there have these top marketing goals, and yet you are your team. You need more sales leads. You need more digital marketing. You want more brand awareness, and you've got to do it all yourself. So be thinking about that as we go through this. What are your goals? What can they be? When I set out to be a podcaster, when I set out to increase my listenership and what I really wanted was multiple goals. I wanted an authority. I wanted to get more speaking engagements. I wanted to get more opportunities. I wanted to write a book. I wanted also, though, not to kill myself on time. So that's what I did. And so how did I become an Inc. columnist? How did I get more speaking engagements? I don't have my books out yet because I found out they weren't as important, but I have certainly freed up my time. But I was just like you. I was on the marketing roller coaster. And actually, this is my partner and husband here, Tom Hazard. So he's my co-founder of Monetize. And we were on that marketing roller coaster just like you. We started our podcast because we couldn't get enough new clients. We were in this business where we were ghost designers, hidden behind the scene. We worked for Martha Stewart, but she wasn't going to recommend us. So what were we going to do? So we were looking at a new and emerging market called 3D printing. And we were looking at adding these services and products related to that to our business. And as we did that, we thought, how are we going to find out if people want to listen? I've got 0 names on our email list. what are we going to do? We have to build leads. We need to have more people, or we're never going to get more clients in this particular world where we come out from behind the brand and are no longer ghosts. So we started our first podcast called WTFFF, and FFF stands for Fused Filament Fabrication, which is the truly geeky term for 3D printing. Don't worry if you don't know what it is, but we started this in 2015, and when we started it, we had spent months learning everything there was about how to podcast, what we were going to do. We watched videos and read books and did all of these things. I should say, I read all the books, Tom watched all the videos. That's how that was our division of labor, right? And we did all of that, and we launched on April 15th, and 6 months later, we had 25,000 listeners. And we were featured in Forbes as a way to fast track your growing authority. And it really was working for us. But more than that, we found all kinds of power in our website and all the things that we were doing. And what we really found was that we should not be offering new services, that there was more of a market for our information than there was for our products. So thank goodness we didn't deep dive and invest in this new venture for us. Now, track that up to a new podcast that I just started this year. It's called The New Trust Economy. And I launched it in January with my co-host Monica Profit, so it's Profit and Hazard. And I went from starting that to Larry King in 30 days. So, that was fast authority. Keep in mind, when Larry King invited me on the show, and I'm starting to talk about the new trust economy and all of these things, I was not an expert in it at all. My podcast was solely focused on exploring it and experiencing it. And what we found in that was that this fast authority, people were out there wanting to experience it with me. And so that's what got me that invite. And from that, I now have in July a speaking engagement for 200 angel investing women in New York City. So isn't that amazing how fast that authority can work with you? Now, I also have a really strong base because I have all my other podcasts and I have all the other authority things that I've built. So it's probably not going to be as fast for you in that 30-day kind of window unless you already are truly an authority and you're just coming out from behind the scenes. You're just coming out from being that ghosted. So are you ready to podcast your way to influence and authority? Shall we talk about that? First things I want to do is talk about market influence, because influence is a little bit different than authority. You've heard of this, Instagram influencers, right? Influencers are all the people who have large followings, but they maybe don't have a deep dive and authority in a segment. So they have no deep expertise in it. They're great at marketing, they're great at drawing an audience in, and then they've got to find things to sell them. They've got to find things to share with them. It's a constant pressure of, I got to be on the cutting edge. Not so great for brands because they're already moving on to the next things, because when it gets old with their audience, it's old and it's done. So that's not a really consistent way. That's what we call sponsorship, right? When you get a sponsorship, it's because it's got tied to your core, who you are, what your brand's about. It's tied to your authority, not to your influence. So advertisers, affiliates are typically what happens in an influencer world. In a authority-based world, we have deep expertise. Maybe we're selling our own things. Maybe we're selling things that are coming from our joint venture partners. Maybe we're selling deep into a niche of expertise that we have that we write books on and speak on. That's what we want, is to combine the two things, because I find a lot of authority, a lot of experts are hidden experts. You know who you are. You're not getting your voice heard. You're a hidden expert, you're behind the scenes, and you're not coming out in front and growing a big audience. You're not growing a quality audience. You're not getting that influence side of what's going on. So we're really wanting to tie both together through podcasting. But first, I also want to make sure that I'm dialing back in and hitting what's a podcast, because I get that question a lot. What's a podcast? So a podcast is not necessarily a video cast, but it's also not. It can start from a video. A podcast is, though, syndicated on places like iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and iHeart and Spotify and all of those places. So it's syndicated out, but it's truly an audio file at the end of the day. And that's what really happens with it, is that it just then gets syndicated out. But it's housed in one single source on one server somewhere. And I want to be defining that because I want you to clearly understand that. You don't host it on your website, and those people that do, it's a huge mistake. So we'll talk about that deep dive later, but I just want you to understand that it is going to be coming from a server somewhere and syndicated out. So you don't have to have the audience because it's being syndicated to an audience that already exists, whether the audience is on Spotify or iTunes or in any one of the other directories that are out there. There are people looking for podcast shows. They're looking to listen to something while they're in the car, while they're jogging at the gym, while they're walking around the neighborhood with their dog, while they're washing dishes. Like, all of those things are places at which you can be heard. You can be requested in this place. There are 700,000 podcasts worldwide, and overall we estimate somewhere between, there's estimates that range between 300 and 500,000 active podcasters. Remember back to all those millions of YouTube channels and Facebook pages? 700,000, that's a smaller playing field, and 500,000 active English speaking, way smaller. So we're now being requested in an environment that's eager for information. So a couple of years ago, Malcolm Gladwell started his podcast. It was called Revisionist History. And he was on Stephen Colbert's show, and he said something brilliant that I want to really share with you about the power of podcasting. He could have started another book. He could have, he's got, I don't even know, 10, 12 bestsellers, something like that, maybe even more by now. But he said he started a podcast because you think with your eyes, but you feel with your ears. And if you're feeling with your ears, then people are getting deep into you. They're getting emotional. They're getting to know, like, and trust you. And you can become bingeable, because that's how we consume content today. Podcasts are bingeable. When you find one, you listen to all their episodes. So that's what we want for you. This is sort of the new school of podcasting. But let's talk a little bit about the old school of podcasting. Recording in your car is fine. You may have heard this from some gurus. You can put your name on your show, and you should put your name on your show because you should brand you. That's old school. You can build a big audience and monetize with passive income from ads and affiliates. That's also a myth. It doesn't work as often today. Let's talk about what does work. What builds authority? And you know what? Authority might just be a pair of platform heels. It doesn't have to be this gigantic stage platform. It might be just a little bit higher than where you are right now, and that's okay. But why isn't that old school stuff working to build authority? It's not working because 75 million monthly listeners of podcasts are way more savvy than they used to be, because they've got great content, because there's pro competition out there. Professional production studios from Gimlet, iHeart, New York Times, and others, and Hollywood's jumping on board left and right, that they're out there and they're producing higher, more professional content. Does that mean you shouldn't do it if you're not a pro? No, absolutely. It just means that you have to do a few things that step up your game and aren't recording in your car. Ads are a longer game than they used to be. The audience side is harder to achieve. It's harder to achieve 1 million downloads a month. And you're not really an early entrant. That's why it's not working. That's why it worked for the old school podcasters and the passive income ones. It worked for them, but it's not quite working the same way today. But there are ways, new school ways to make it work. So here's some of our new school tips. We call it brandcasting. We call it brandcasting because we're branding you. We're casting you out there. We're casting your whole brand. Professionalism matters. It matters because you need to be at or above the rest of your industry at that. That's the pro level you need to achieve. You don't have to achieve a serial Gimlet level. You have to achieve the most professional person in your category. And it's not about you. It's about your listener. So naming shows after you is not the best way to go about it, but there are great ways to drive the right traffic to you and have you be their resource, have you be their go-to person, have you be the host they prefer. It's just a little bit of a different strategy on how you start. And it starts with building authority so that you can make money in your core expertise. So rather than monetize, we call this poditize. And so we want to help build this authority, and we're going to build it in pieces. We're going to build it, a few inches in your heels at a time till you're getting your big stage that you're looking for. Here are some of the different ways you can poditize. You can have organic web traffic growth. That sounds crazy, Tracy, because I'm building a podcast. Why would I get web traffic? That's something that's critical to the process, making sure that you're sending everyone back to your website so that it grows. And with that keyword growth, words that are associated powerfully in your expertise needs to grow at the same time. And when you do, that adds levels of authority to you, and it adds levels of influence as well. So you want engagement, you want social plus engagement, you want to get them off of Facebook, you want to get them off of YouTube, you want to get them off of Instagram, and you want to get them to you, because you don't want those channels to own them. You want them to be yours. And that's when you get a qualified list growth. They're choosing you, and they're growing with your list, and they're growing with you. And that grows views, listens, stickiness, where they're staying on your site, where they're binge listening to you, where they're hanging on your every word. And with that will come clients, products, events that you can sell. And then, yes, advertisers and sponsors, but you might not want them. That's a little bit different. But then again, you might. So I want to just go through a few examples of people who are productizing, who are growing their monetization in their core business in different ways that you might not have heard of or thought about before. And yeah, I'm going to start with the first one in sponsorship. So Whitetail Rendezvous, this great deer hunting podcast, very, very detailed and niche. But instead of going from know, like, and trust, the host went from trust, like, to know. So how did he do that? Well, he's a deep dive expert in whitetail deer hunting. And so he got audience off of iTunes, off of all the directories, off of all those places to choose to come to him because, wow, this is really interesting. And there aren't a lot of podcasts about this. There might be a few episodes here and there, but there's not entire shows around that. And then the more they listened and the more they knew that he was a valuable resource, they started to really like his show. And then they wanted to get to know him better. They went to his website. They frequented the sponsors he recommended. And now he builds up a great authority with sponsorship. And it's deep dive because if he doesn't believe it's worthwhile, if it's not useful to him, then he's not going to use it. He's not going to share it with his audience. And that audience trusts him, likes him, and knows that he is going to give them the most valuable and most relevant resources available. Totally different sponsorship model, right? Than just taking any ads and any affiliates that come your way. We also have ways to go from TV to radio to Brandcaster. Why would you want to go that way? Don't you want to get on TV? Well, Dr. Carolyn Rivera was on TV. She was Mama C on Survivor. And she went from being on TV to now having to kind of keep her audience and keep the fans that she had built excited and interested, and maybe merge them into buying things from her business, because she is actually a business expert. She's not just a celebrity. And so she went from that to doing a radio station. But the radio station kept stealing her authority. They kept putting all the ads for their show on there, for their station, for other shows that had nothing to do with her business. So she shifted over to being a brandcaster, where she could be in complete authority and control of that and dial those fans and audience into the people who truly wanted more from her, the ones she could truly engage with and she could keep connected with. And she's in control of that now. Another example is one of my favorite people. I just saw him last night, John Livesey, the successful pitch. He's the pitch whisperer. I might have coined that phrase when I wrote an article about him. But he's written multiple books, and he's gone from his podcast to bestseller. And he's done it multiple times. And how did he do it? Well, he does these really great interviews with venture capitalists and angel investors. And they're all about, what are you looking for in a pitch and what's valuable to you? And they're really useful information if you're out there and you want to pitch for that type of funding. And so what he would do is he would put together a book and feature these interviews that he did with the most relevant, and he'd group them into sections about like getting to yes, talking about being irresistible to investors. Like, how do you do that? And so he would talk about his expertise area of how you might do that and how a pitch is structured and how all of that works. And then he'd use these stories that would reinforce it from all of the investors. And his book was done in no time. And so he's put out a book. I think he's been putting out one every 6 months right now. So it's very fast for him to be able to do that because he already has all the content, and he already knows that content is having synergy with the audience because he knows that they're engaging with it. He knows which episodes, which guest interviews were the most valuable to him, so he knows which ones should belong in the book. Another one that I really like is Dr. Diana Hamilton. She had a great show on a radio station. It was perfect for the radio station. It was perfect for the way that she was reaching out to her audience. But she also wanted to drive more authority traffic back to her because she's an unbelievable expert already. But she wanted to get more traffic. They weren't coming from the radio station to her website. So how could she do that? So she took it and she took a model of not only podcasting, but also taking it to the blogging level. And by that, she started building tremendous web traffic and keyword growth month over month. She was doing a minimum of 30% growth month over month within the first 30 days of starting that. So she's been able to capture her traffic off of something that really has been working for her, but capturing it in a more personal way and getting it so that she can list build and market to them and provide them more value. Another one of my favorite podcasters is Scott Carson, the Note Closers Show. You cannot get more real estate niche-y than Note Closers. And yet he has a tremendous following. He knows how to attract followers fast. And he follows a really cool strategy of doing different shows. So seasons, he might do his boot camp and then he might run it out as a show within and of itself as 25 episodes. He might run a Note Night in America, which is one night a week. And he might run that and put that into a season all of its own. And he's doing all of those things, and he's also starting from video. His video cast has been listened to and watched just under 250,000 times, and that basically doubled his audience in 10 months. He's been doing more than that now. This is a little bit old statistic, but that's the power of adding video for him. So he starts with video, then he moves to podcast, and he blogs. So he's doing the whole brand casting route. Another one that I really love is Juliet Clark. And Juliet Clark is a publishing and author and speaker advisor. And she helps dial in audience with this very great quiz to qualify model. And but what she finds is that people write the wrong book so often. And being able to have the podcast, being able to have that starting point on it is really valuable to people so that they can discover whether or not what people want from you, what's going to drive them. And it builds your audience so you're able to market your book to them later. So you've already got that platform built in, because if you're trying to get a publisher out there to find you, the first thing they're going to ask you about is how big is your platform. We have a lot of doctors on our platform as well. So we see what's working in that field. And it seems maybe counterintuitive to be getting a local patients, right? Because podcasting is so international, as I pointed out earlier, right? And with the 75 million listeners every month, I mean, they could be all over the place, right? So how do you end up getting more qualified clients? Well, this is the interesting thing. So Dr. Kevin Pecca, his show is called Expect Miracles, and he does something. When he meets up and does sort of his complimentary introduction session with a patient, where they get to meet him and all of that, he might evaluate the problems and say, oh, well, you're having issue with your neck. He's a chiropractor, with your neck, and because of how you're computing every single day, how much work you're doing at your computer. You know, I've done an episode on that, and I'd really love for you to listen to it as a follow-up. And he gives them the episode and he sends them to it. And darn it if they don't come back and sign up. That's how it was working. But not just that, there's a locality feature in Google that you're tapping into. So when you post up your podcast, when you're sharing it, when you're putting it on your blog, even if you're only putting the short version, but if you put the full transcript version, you're doing even better. When you do that, you're tapping into an algorithm of being shown in a relevant area. So in other words, he's in New Jersey, and when New Jersey people type in, I'm looking for a chiropractor, and it automatically assumes they're looking local, and it serves up someone who's putting out the most consistent and constant content, and that happens to be Dr. Pecca. One of the other ways, and this is one of the ways I love it, is let's say you're building a bigger company. You're building a bigger brand. Maybe you're a PR firm and everybody just wants you. What are you going to do about it? Because you can't take on every client, right? I knew this from my design business, and that was why I had such trouble scaling my team. So Popular Mechanics and many other of our podcasters who have this kind of team approach brand their team. We have law firms who are doing it too. It's a really interesting model. You can listen to it on the Most Useful Podcast Ever, which is Popular Mechanics Podcast. But you can bring in this case, they're bringing in the editors of the different sections in the magazine, but you could bring it from the lawyers in the different departments within your firm, whether it's divorce or intellectual property or whatever that is. And you can have them trade off in sharing their expertise with your audience and brand the podcast for the whole company or for the whole publication. Now, keep in mind here, we didn't call it the Popular Mechanics Podcast, right? It's called the Most Useful Podcast Ever. That's a strategy as well, because the last thing you want to do is be salesy. So you don't want it to be all about your corporation. You want it to be about the core of what your entire team can bring to an audience. So these are just some of the ways that we help build authority, and we start building them up from the ground up, inch by inch if we have to. And then it starts to organically grow on its own until you have your own platform and your own stage. So I promised you that I was going to give you the key success components to building a podcast today, and I'm going to. This is the core of what we do in the order in which we do it. We have a strategy. We clearly start out with a strategy for our show concept and how we're going to build the listing on iTunes, because it has to be right. Everything from your cover art to your intro outros to your description, all of those things have to be dialed in and right for the strategy of your show, of which I just talked about a bunch of different ways that might happen. And why do we want that to happen is because we want the show that you build to support your business goals, right? Remember, we talked about them before, and that starts strategically. So that's where we always start. We spend a bit of time here. It doesn't have to take forever. We launch shows in 30 days, and you can do that as well. It just puts some careful thought and deep understanding of what it takes and what all the components to making sure that your listing is expressing that, so you can be found when someone's searching for you. Then we want to spend a significant amount of time on our content plan, right? We should be deep diving every single month. That should be your only thing that you care about. If you're spending all this time in your production and worrying about how launching your show and worrying about all those details, I'm going to tell you, you're wasting your time, because your content is what everybody interacts with every single day that your show is live. And that's what matters most. So we want that content to be authority building, and we want it to have a guest strategy as well. Maybe you don't want guests. Maybe that's not the thing for you. Now, it might be for some, or maybe you want some different guests in the beginning of your show than you want later in the show. Having a strategic plan and what I call an editorial calendar, because that's very much in line with what magazines and publications do. Having an editorial style content plan for the next year is critical for you to be able to support the strategy of your show growth. And if you're doing it right, and if you're dialing it in, and if you're flexing, and if you're seeing what's working and what doesn't, and then changing your plan dynamically as you go, then you're going to have more success there. So we have lots of master classes and all kinds of support and content planning and content generation and guesting. This is the continual support we provide at our company, because this is critical year after year after year. We also want to make sure that you have done for you hosting and syndication, because this isn't something you should think about. Things change on iTunes all the time. Shows can get delisted. This is technical stuff that your host should be taking care of, because remember when I said you need to put your files somewhere and they shouldn't be on your website, but they also shouldn't be on a site that offers you something for free. And I'm saying that, yes, because I own Podetize and we are a host, but I'm saying that because I see the problems with free hosting. The problems with free hosting are that people are stealing your authority, that they are taking it, that you don't have intellectual property rights to your content. That's what happens on radio shows. It's what happens with some of the hosts that offer free services. It happens wherever you go and use their software to record. They're also stealing your authority. So we don't want to have that in our plan here. It's not what it's about if you intend to make money and have a successful show. It is not what you need. You need some amount of hosting. And you want that host to take care of all the done for you syndication things and support you and do all of those things that you might need to make sure that your show launches successfully and on time. You should not have to do that yourself in this day and age. That's old school. Any host is that makes you do it all yourself is outdated. The next thing, number 4, is post-production. We call that brandcasting, right? And remember, I referred to a lot of those successful podcasters are doing video and blogging in addition to the podcasting. And do you have to do that? No. But will you want to add that? Yes, because the most successful podcasts are building in ways at which their brand is touched so that we can be seen, heard, and found. And found relies still on a Google algorithm. It relies on somebody going to a website or typing in a keyword to find you. So we want to make all of that happen. So good post-production has that in it. Should you be spending a ton of time editing your podcast? Absolutely not. I do not want to see you doing that. Remember I said professionalism matters, but there's a lot of ways to do that that doesn't require a heavy editing. It requires a little bit because you got to put some intro outros on there and make it a little more professional, but you can record better to begin with so that you don't have a lot of post-production needs. Because I don't want to learn how to edit a show. I never did and I never have. The last thing that you really want is you got to make sure that you have support and publicity going on. And publicity is not just a launch publicity. You have to have ongoing publicity. You have to remember to talk about your show everywhere you go. You have to remember to sell it from the stage. Your show is a way to get continual touch points with you. So you've got to continually put that out and get publicity for that. We like to support that a lot because I work in that sort of PR world. I work with PR agents every day. They're always pitching me articles for my columns. And so I understand this need and I understand who I can and can't write about. So having the right publicity and understanding what it's going to take so that you can share your show out is critical as well. So these are the key success components: strategy, content planning, hosting and syndication, post-production, professional post-production, and support and publicity. So you want to get started? You want to poditize? Do you want to be seen, heard, and found? Finally come out from behind the scenes? No longer be a ghost? To be that influencer plus authority? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today, because I am going to be running a live boot camp in a couple of weeks. It is a absolute learn all the details live boot camp. It's got 8 hours of training. It's got master classes. It's got live experts. Me and my partner, Tom Hazard, will be there to answer your questions. It's got templates. We give you email templates and all the things that we use to make our show more professional. So it steps up your game. You don't have to learn any of that. You just can copy and paste it. We've got discounts of all sorts of things, like discounts for becoming and hosting with us, discounts for programs if you don't want to create any of the assets yourself. And there are bonus gifts like my PR tips and all of the things that we constantly offer in our program. You're going to get all of the past ones as a part of this live boot camp. We call it the Start Your Authority in 1 Day Boot Camp. Start Your Authority podcast in 1 Day Boot Camp. Poditize.com/bootcamp for more information. It's a full day live training with recordings. And we did it before without recordings, and we no longer offer it that way because you need the recordings. Because if you cannot show up and spend every minute on that day, then you need the recordings to make sure that you aren't making mistakes when you're launching your show so that your show is successful. So we now just require it. So Start Your Authority podcast in 1 Day Boot Camp is coming up. And this is all the things that the boot camp covers. Influence plus authority strategy. We talked a little bit about that, but we want to help you dial it in to make it personal, make it right for you. Getting your name and your cover art just right so that it's about them and not about you. So that they track it. It becomes more bingeable and people want to listen to it. Making sure that your description and your iTunes listing is perfect so that you'll be found, that you'll be in the right categories, that you can compete against the other podcasts that are out there and show them what you've got that makes you unique and special and why they ought to give your show a shot even though it's brand new. Intro, outro, copy, music, voiceover, all of those things. This is a critical part of being professional. Those that skip that think that they can just live stream and drop it into podcasting, but fail to put the intro, outro, send a signal that we don't care about podcasters. And that's not a signal you want to be sending. You want to send a signal, I understand what podcast listeners want, and I'm going to make sure that I put in a decent intro, outro, not too lengthy, that's perfect for the listenership I want to attract. So that's a critical part. We're going to talk about all the great components of that as well. We're going to dive into equipment selection. If you spend too much money on equipment, shame on you. Don't do it. It's not necessary. In fact, some of the most expensive equipment makes more headache for you in editing later. So we want to make sure you don't fall into that. So we're going to help you choose your equipment that's right for your environment and right for you. Recording tips. Of course, you want to record so that you have the least amount of editing possible. And maybe no editing at all. That is something that we like to go over. Guest and content planning, we talked about that already. We deep dive into this. We have worksheets. We have ways to do this. We talk about the different strategies that can really help you grow the type of show so it's matched to that influence and authority strategy. We also talk about really great follow-up and how to treat your guests and how to work with them, how to get them on the show, because that's worries some of you. I know it does. Are they going to say yes? And we're going to help them be sure that they will say yes to you. Hosting and syndication, we're really not going to touch much on it because our business covers that. We cover that for as low as $49 a month. So I'm just going to wipe that away as this is a cheap entry point for you. Hosting and syndication, where we're supporting and helping you and providing you full support for that dollar, that's something you need to get yourself into. We have a comparison chart on our website. Go to it, check it out if you would like. But the reality is that I know that we are providing great value here. And with that, I'm going to provide value for you growing a successful show as well. So I think you're going to choose me at the end of the day. You're going to choose Podetize. Show post-production. We're going to talk about what makes great show post-production so you can brandcast as well. I'm not going to kid you. It's a bit of work. But there also are done-for-you services and other things that we can help you with that we'll talk about to make it easier for you. Guest follow-up, you got to have some good guest email. And I'm going to leave you with a little tease. We do something we call ego bait. And I can't wait to talk to you about that at the boot camp because it is what has helped our hosts satisfy their guests, make them super happy, and be sure that their guest shares out the fact that they were on the episode. Social media share and follow-up plan. Social media, we don't do that here, but we do know how to plan for it because you are going to have way more content than you possibly need once you're podcasting, once you're brandcasting. So how do you share it out? How can you make it easy for you? How can you make it easy for a virtual assistant to support you or to have a agency support you? How can you make it easy for them? How can you make sure that your voice is getting out there and that you are sharing these things that you've been working so hard to grow? And then, of course, I mentioned before, publicity and launch tips. We're not going to skip those. Those are going to be there for you because if you don't have a successful launch, then you put out this podcast and it just fizzles. We want to make sure that you do. So we're going to give you our best practices for how to get as much publicity and how to get the best launch possible. So now, I know that was a lot. Our bootcamp covers a lot. But if you can't wait, if you don't want to do any of that, if you don't have time to sit down for an 8-hour class, then let us do it for you. Let us have a chat about what that looks like. Podetize.com/inquiry. Tom will be there to talk with you and talk with you about what that looks like and what possibilities. And believe me, we have all kinds of price ranges and other things. You'd be surprised how easy it is to have it done for you because we want you all to become bingeable. These are our podcasts to support that. You can listen some more if you'd like. You can listen more about how to build influence and authority. We go over it every week. It's our podcast for podcasters. The Center of Influence highlights podcasters out there who are killing it, who are successful already. And then I write articles from those podcasts. So you're getting both at the same time. Go and listen. Get some more information on us. And then decide to come back to the bootcamp, decide to make a call to Tom, ask some more questions. So you can go to the Feed Your Brand Facebook page, ask some questions. You can email hello@podetize.com. And again, you can reach Tom by podetize.com/inquiry, and that will get you in the done for you. And then please go to podetize.com/bootcamp, join our bootcamp, and let us help you get the most successful podcast launch with all of the new tactics, the new school tactics that the gurus aren't out there teaching you. Let us get that information out for you so that you can build the most successful podcast that gets you off the marketing roller coaster and into building both authority and influence at the same time. Can't wait to hear your podcast.